The national championship game is set between Alabama and Georgia, a rematch of the SEC championship game. So before we do our preview here on College Football Now, get your score predictions in. Who you got, the Dogs or the Crimson Tide? Let's preview this national championship matchup. You're watching College Football Now by Chat Sports. I'm your host, Chase Senior. I hope all of you are having a great weekend, and Happy New Year to all of you as we ring in 2022. On New Year's Eve, a couple of semifinals in the college football playoff, both of which were blowouts, which really sets the scene for a really intriguing, fascinating, and very evenly matched national championship game between these two SEC powers. First, it was Georgia able to really just dominate Michigan from the start of that ball game, from kickoff all the way until the end of regulation, and Alabama able to outlast Cincinnati for 3 quarters or so. Cincinnati able to keep it close, but really the Bearcats didn't have the horses in the trenches to really keep up with an Alabama team that ran the hell out of the football, led by Brian Robinson, who had a career day, stayed with the Crimson Tide for 5 years, finally got his first start of his career earlier this year, started every game for the Crimson Tide throughout 2021, and it paid big dividends for him. 26 carries for 204 yards, and Bryce Young threw for less than 200 yards, but it was all good at the end of the day because Alabama able to establish that ground game right from the opening possession of that game, as Cincinnati was not able to just control them in the trenches. As for Georgia and Michigan, a completely dominant performance for the Bulldogs on both sides of the ball. And Stetson Bennett played really good against Michigan as compared to what he did in that SEC championship loss against Alabama. And if Georgia can get this type of performance from Stetson Bennett in the national championship game, when he went 20 of 30, 313 yards with 3 touchdowns, this game could be a lot closer than that blowout back a couple weeks ago. James Cook also fabulous, not just in the ground game, but also through the passing game as well. And this is really a matchup between two star-studded defenses, between two teams who have a lot of players on both sides of the ball who are going to be playing in the future at the NFL level. So, given that both of these games in the semifinals were blowouts and some of these bowl games just weren't all that exciting, do you think that the college football playoff needs to expand? It's going to be the pinned comment on today's video. So if you get hit with that YouTube ad break, scroll on down and get your votes in. Type Y for yes or type N for no. Going back and flipping the clocks back to that SEC championship game, Georgia able to take an early 10-0 lead on Alabama. They were the #1 team really all throughout the year, and you thought, okay, the Bulldogs finally going to be able to knock down those cobwebs in the closet and get past that mental hurdle about going against Alabama, because the Crimson Tide with Nick Saban have been a team historically and over the last several years in recent memory has dominated Georgia. And the Bulldogs have had a couple of opportunities to take down Alabama in some really big matchups. Of course, the national championship game a couple years ago when Jalen Hurts was benched, Tua Tagovailoa comes back in, and Alabama ends up hoisting the national championship trophy. So for me, this game comes down to this. Can Georgia get past that mental hurdle of taking on Alabama, a team that has mentally and physically owned them during some of these recent matchups? SEC championship game, after the Crimson Tide went down in that early hole, Bryce Young locked down the Heisman Trophy. He was unconscious. He was dropping dimes, fitting footballs into keyholes, 26 of 44, 421, and 3 touchdowns. The big storyline for the Georgia Bulldogs, that offense really sputtered. Stetson Bennett was bad. He looked overwhelmed by a historically decent and mediocre to solid Alabama defense, which in the SEC championship found its stride, and that momentum carried into that semifinal game against Cincinnati over the weekend. Stetson Bennett, folks, must play much better this go-around against Alabama for Georgia to have a chance in this game to pull off the upset. He can't play like he played in that SEC championship game, where he got pressured, he had happy feet in the pocket. He didn't seem sure of himself when he did drop back to pass because that pressure ended up getting to him after the first couple drives of the game, and he really was just a little bit indecisive in the pocket, made a couple of bad mistakes, which then led to Alabama scoring chances. But if Georgia gets the Stetson Bennett from the college football semifinal, this offense becomes a lot more dangerous. We know that Georgia wants to run the football with Cook. They got him involved in the pass game as well on some of those wheel routes, which was really, really impressive. So already, Alabama's defense has something else to think about. If you combine that with the fact that Stetson Bennett might play a little bit better, he can also run it too. He's underrated in that regard. That's how this game might be able to be a little bit closer than that aforementioned SEC Championship game. 20 of 30, 313 and 3 tutties to 0 picks is how Stetson Bennett has to play for Georgia to be victorious in this matchup. Because if you had Bryce Young on this Georgia team, I don't really even think that this game is close. In fact, I'd have Georgia as the overwhelming favorites in this matchup. Bryce Young not draft eligible. If he was, I think he'd be taken atop the NFL draft this year, locked down the Heisman Trophy back a couple weeks ago. Easy to see why. Now, he wasn't asked to do a bunch against Cincinnati, and I thought Cincinnati's secondary actually played very well in that semifinal. That game really came down to the interiors of that offensive and defensive line, and I think Bryce Young might have to up his game a little bit against a better Georgia defense as compared to that Cincinnati defense for Alabama to win this game and win Nick Saban's 7th national championship game. Bryce Young in that game against Cincinnati, 17 of 28, and at times had to make some plays happen, and he did, but I just think he has to play better against Georgia in the national championship game. Hey, Chat Sports is where it's at. We continue to grow like crazy, way north of 272,000 subscribers, so if you like the NFL, the NBA, and college football, we give you free daily videos, multiple videos a day, so if you like what you're seeing, hit that red subscribe button down below or go to youtube.com/chatsportstv and join the faithful family here at Chat Sports. I talk about that Alabama ground game, really being dominant in that game against Cincinnati in Jerry World outside of Dallas. He had a career day, and it's a really cool story for Brian Robinson. He was behind Damian Harris and Najee Harris for a little while. He grew up in Tuscaloosa, just miles away from that Alabama campus, did not elect to transfer, instead spent 5 years in Tuscaloosa with Alabama, and it paid off in the biggest game of his career up to this point. As he was the starter, he was the bell cow, and he toted the rock 26 times for 204 yards, average yards per pop at nearly 8. Could get into the end zone to find pay dirt, but either way, Brian Robinson really able to establish the momentum in that game against Cincinnati on New Year's Eve. As for James Cook, he really was fantastic. Now, he was just okay in the ground game, 6 carries for 32 yards. Where he did his damage against Michigan, though, 112 receiving yards. And I talked about this earlier. James Cook, that dual threat back, kind of like his brother Dalvin Cook, who can run in between the tackles, he can get out to the perimeter, but also if you involve him in the pass game, it gives this Georgia offense something else to boost about and something else to kind of pose a threat toward that Alabama defense. And James Cook coming out of the backfield as a pass catcher was excellent and superb against Michigan in that blowout victory. Now, if you want to bet on this game between Alabama and Georgia, this line is going to continue to fluctuate in the days leading up to the national championship game as we do record this on Sunday, about a week away. You can do so and bet on this game, lay the lettuce down, and be a man by using our sportsbook partner, BetUS. They're offering a 125% deposit bonus. All you got to do, chatsports.com/bet, that link down below, enter the promo code CHAT125. You put down $100, and by using that link in that promo code, you get an additional $125 back. As for the betting odds in this matchup, Georgia, the favorites right now, -3. The over-under set at 52.5. I think Alabama should be the favorites. That's why I said that a little bit earlier, because I think if Alabama wins, it's not going to be pulling off the upset. If Georgia dethrones Alabama, that is going to be the upset. You see what I'm doing there? But hey, Vegas likes Georgia at -3. What do you like? Lay your bets down and be a man. Now, this is going to be a matchup between two defenses that are littered with some star-studded talent, especially some talent that is going to be wreaking havoc playing on Sundays. I asked a buddy this over the weekend. If you could have one linebacker, who would you choose to start your NFL defense with? Now, Will Anderson is not draft eligible. He's going to be back with Alabama next year. But would you take him or Micah Parsons? Micah Parsons is one of the front runners for Defensive Player of the Year. My point here being, that's how good Will Anderson is. And if he was draft eligible like Bryce Young, I think he'd be a top 5 pick. His season has really been incredible all across the board. 97 tackles, 31 tackles for loss, 17.5 sacks, and 2 pass breakups. At 6'4", 243, with that athleticism to really roam sideline to sideline, but also go vertical as well, he is terrific. So too is Nakobe Dean, who's one of the best linebackers in the college football atmosphere as well. He too has put forward a terrific year, and he too a first-round talent. Stud linebacker is going to be on display in Indy for the Natty. For Nakobe Dean, you saw how good he was against Michigan, making plays in the backfield, also making plays east to west, 68 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks this year, 4 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. I think he's more of a coverage linebacker as compared to Will Anderson, who you can kind of use in that Swiss Army knife role, kind of like a Micah Parsons. And hey, either of these guys going to be very good at the NFL level, just like Parsons is right now. The overarching storyline in this matchup, I know a lot of people have pointed to that Alabama defense and said, you know what, for Nick Saban, this is really only an average to mediocre squad on that side of the rock. I think that's false. Look, you play in the SEC, you're going up against some of these high-octane offenses any given week. It's going to be hard in 2021, given the rule changes, style of play, pace of play, to hold opposing offenses in the most elite conference in college football to 21 points or less any given matchup. But in the 2 biggest games of the season, what have we seen from this Alabama defense? They've been on lockdown mode against Georgia in the SEC title game and against Cincinnati in the Final Four. So, college football national championship game. It is set. Rematch of the SEC championship game. And according to the odds, this is the matchup that everybody had predicted pretty much. Georgia, 3-point favorites against Alabama, over-under set at 52.5. Before we get out of here, hopefully you enjoyed the preview and hopefully you subscribe to the channel, but flood that comment section and predict the score between the Crimson Tide and the Bulldogs.